Hi, this is Laura Lively with PaymentsEd, and I'm very excited to be here with one of our advisors who sits on our PaymentsEd board, Michel, and he is with dLocal, and he's going to be sharing with you, what's happening now in the LatAm payments world. So, Michel, I'm going to just kick it over to you.
Thank you, Laura and PaymentsEd for hosting this webinar today. Hi, everyone. I'm Michel. I lead growth for dLocal. I'm originally from Uruguay in South America and currently based out of San Francisco, California. For those of you in the audience that are not familiar with dLocal, we are a 360 payments platform focused on connecting international companies with their users in emerging markets, both by doing pay-ins, meaning collecting money in local currency, and payouts, meaning disbursing money in local currency. Quick overview of today's agenda, where we will cover 4 big topics. First, we're going to talk about Brazil's new real-time payment system. Then we're going to touch on the latest developments for interoperability in Argentina. After that, we're going to discuss e-wallets in LatAm, what's working and what's not. And finally, some of the latest regulation changes in Latin America, and particularly around Mexico and their new fintech law. And before we start, let's take a quick look at the e-commerce payments landscape in LatAm so we understand the lay of the land. Depending on the market, between 50% to around 2/3 of the payments online are completed with cards, both debit and credit, and both local only and international cards. Now, the other half or third, again, depending on the market, still relies on cash payments, bank transfers, and e-wallets. Let's get started then with our first disruption for today's webinar. The first disruption is PIX, and you're going to hear this word like 50 times in the next few minutes. PIX is a game changer. PIX is a system that will be launched by the Central Bank of Brazil later this year that enables real-time payments in the country. It should become Brazil's main payment infrastructure, and use cases range from peer-to-peer transactions to paying for bills to buying in store or online from different merchants, among many, many others. This new system will enable immediate transactions that get confirmed in up to 10 seconds. Today, just for context, a Boletto payment can take up to 3 days to get confirmed. And now this completely reshapes the industry. The main instruments that are used today for doing bank transfers in Brazil, such as DOC and TED, are only available during banking hours and business days. And PIX will be available 24/7, even during weekends and holidays. Some of Brazil's central bank's main goals include the democratization of the financial system, having money circulating faster, including new transfer and payment tools in Brazilians' daily routines. And also, this new system comes in a way as a direct response to the proliferation of cryptocurrency in the region. Who is PIX for? Who can participate in PIX? Participation will be mandatory for all regulated financial institutions and payment institutions that are licensed with the central bank in Brazil, having over 500,000 active customer accounts. This 500,000 includes checking and savings accounts, as well as prepaid payments accounts. These institutions must provide their customers with all the functionalities for initiating and receiving instant payments by using PIX. And there are 2 types of participants. Direct participants, which are basically financial or payment institutions that have an account with the central bank, meaning commercial banks with higher revenue or significant number of customers. And they will settle transactions directly on the SPI platform. And I'll explain in a minute what this is. And the second type of participant are the indirect participants. Basically, their transactions need to be settled through a direct participant. This includes payment institutions that are not licensed by the central bank. Here's a pretty simple diagram illustrating the different actors in a PIX transaction. And if we go from left to right, there's a consumer, a payer, trying to send money to a payee, which is a merchant in this case, but it could be either a person or a company. The payer has an account with a financial institution that is connected either directly or indirectly with SPI. For its acronym in Portuguese, it means Instant Payment System, which is essentially the settlement infrastructure. And the DICT, which is a proxy identifier database. And think about this as a centralized database to identify all the payees and their accounts, and also being able to settle funds in real time. So through this infrastructure, they will then communicate with the payee's financial institution, the merchant in this case, send a notification and settle the funds. For the sake of clarity, since there are multiple acronyms here, PIX is a single brand for instant payment functionality. It's essential for users to identify the PIX brand in a clear and unambiguous way. And the SPI and proxy database are just the underlying infrastructure. So it's not really customer facing. There are 4 ways of doing a PIX transaction. The first one is through a QR code. This code could be either static, meaning it's always the same for the same payee, or dynamic, so that we generate one code per transaction. Users will log in to their bank or wallets. They will scan the payee's QR code, confirm, and done. It's very simple. The second option to send money is by using one of the address keys, which could be either the payee's phone number, email address, or tax ID, CPF for an individual, and CNPJ for a company. The third option is for in-store payments only. And instead of reading a QR code, users can simply use NFC to pay. This is similar to how Apple Pay works, or even similar to how contactless cards work today. The last option is using the payee's bank account information instead of relying on any of the previously mentioned shortcuts. All the 4 options are extremely easy and straightforward. And let's see a quick video from Brazil's central bank promoting PIX. You probably couldn't hear the audio, but it was just music, so not a big deal. So now let's understand the timeline for PIX. And a bit of history first. A few years back, Brazil's central bank created a group with around 130 financial institutions to start researching the possibility of building a real-time payment system. In December 2018, they announced the first set of guidelines. It took them another year plus to finally announce publicly the creation of PIX a few months ago in February this year. Right now, registrations for PIX are open for both direct and indirect participants. And later this year, in November, PIX is expected to finally and officially launch. Also, between now and November, financial institutions can start playing with a sandbox environment and do test transactions. What's the expected impact coming from PIX? First, from a consumer standpoint, No more waiting 2 or 3 days to get a payment confirmed. It will be done in real time. Fees for transferring money should decrease significantly. It's relevant to note here that each financial institution will set their own prices for using PIX, but it's expected to be way lower than a debit card transaction or a DOC or TED bank transfers. Also, this opens up the option to buy and pay literally 24/7, even without having a credit or debit card. And last but not least, less friction, translating into a better and smoother checkout process. With PIX, debit cards should tend to disappear and credit card usage should decrease as well. From a merchant standpoint, having real-time confirmation for all incoming payments means better stock management, no more need to hold a product for 48 hours until a Boletto gets cleared. Also, reduced cost for accepting payments and getting settled way faster, and having access to a market that is expected to grow to 45 million users. That's around 25% of Brazil's population, so pretty massive. Moving on to our next topic for today, CVU in Argentina. So the first topic was PIX, the second topic now CVU in Argentina. CVU, for its acronym in Spanish, means Clave Virtual Uniforme, or Uniform Virtual Key. It's a way of connecting the traditional banking system with the rising demand for virtual accounts originated in non-bank institutions. It was launched by the central bank in Argentina with the goal of formalizing the banking system. As we said, it allows for interoperability between traditional banks and virtual accounts. Some examples of the financial institutions creating these accounts include PIM, Mercado Pago, Ualá, among others. And with this new regulation, Argentina became the first country in LatAm to allow for this type of transactions among all the financial institutions. Let's understand the difference with a traditional CVU, which stands for Clave Bancaria Única, or Unique Bank Key. Traditional banks have been using CVU for many years now. It's essentially a standard for all bank accounts in the country. And there's also the concept of an alias that traditional CVU can have, which is just a friendlier way of naming this account. Now, new fintech services or non-bank financial institutions are creating literally millions of virtual accounts in Argentina. So they need to regulate this and allow for interoperability between the two standards became mandatory. CVUs are also 22-digit numbers and also can have an alias. Let's see an example of a CVU here. So the first 7 digits identify the financial institution or the PSP. There are 2 verification digits marked in orange, and the remaining 13 digits from 9 to 21 identify the individual, the account holder, basically. Both CVU and CVU can have an alias between 6 and 20 alphanumeric characters. Here's an example of an alias that could be my name, first name dot last name. The CVU regulation has been in place for a while now, something like 2 years, but it was only in late 2019 when the dominant e-wallets, Ualá and Mercado Pago, announced CVU support and started to become more popular. Now, the regulation is clear about every single financial institution allowing for interoperability using the standard, but many banks are still not complying. Challenger banks are naturally pushing for this to be better enforced. Some banks even support CVU in their web apps, but not in their mobile apps. So there's still some more pressure needed for this to be fully adopted. Here's Mercado Pago wallet showing how we can transfer money to someone else, either to a traditional bank using a CVU or a different wallet, Ualá in this case, using CVU. the virtual key. Both keys have the same format, the same 22-digit numbers, so no major efforts are required for the financial institution to implement this. So you can see here the 3 screens where there's some money available in the Mercado Pago account. They put the CVU or their CVU, and they simply transfer money in real time to another virtual account. Now, all of this sounds very technical, lots of acronyms. So what's the actual impact of this? For consumers, they no longer feel excluded if they don't have a traditional bank account. They can interoperate with other virtual accounts or banks very smoothly. Plus, their wallets become more relevant and they can use them to buy online, or even if there's no physical card linked to a virtual wallet, they can still use it online. And for merchants, it means they can reach an even wider market, including millions of unbanked consumers. Let's do a quick poll to better understand our audience today. So we have 2 simple questions. Laura, feel free to kick it off.
Perfect. So yeah, if you guys could just take a moment and answer this for us. So I see some coming in. Now, Michelle's asked me to do something a little different than we normally do. We're not going to share, if I can do this correctly, we are not going to share the results immediately. So I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds or so to get your vote in on this one. All right, so I'm going to close this one.
Awesome, thank you.
And here comes the second one. So great that the responses are coming in. I appreciate everybody. Give you just another 10 seconds or so to get your, this is interesting. The responses on this one are very different. Another 5 seconds just to wrap it up. Get your vote in. Perfect. All right. All right, Michelle.
Thank you, Laura. Let's leave the poll results for later and now move on to our third topic, e-wallets in Latin America. Although initially less popular than cards and cash, e-wallet user adoption is now growing fast in LatAm. New technologies and new regulatory changes, as we've seen previously with Argentina and Brazil, will definitely accelerate the adoption even more. So WeChat in China has been around for many years. Paytm is widely used in India. PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, they are all relevant players globally. E-wallets are cheap, are easy to use, and that partially explains the mass adoption in many geographies. But LatAm has been slower than the rest. And let's look at the numbers. As we mentioned, adoption is still low compared to other regions, but starting to ramp up now. So depending on the market, they range between 1 to 5%. Now here we can see Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico around 3 to 4%. And we are expecting this number to keep increasing in the upcoming years. Some of the most relevant players in the region have been using different strategies and incentives to acquire customers. In some cases, like Rappi, they started as a delivery app and transformed into a financial service product. The same is also true for Uber, Didi, and many other merchants that are transforming into financial services products. Others, like Nubank, were born purely as challenger banks, and their strategy is to provide extremely easy to use banking products without the need of even visiting a bank branch ever. Well, actually, they don't have any. Nubank, they don't have any physical bank branches, and they've managed to get so far over 20 million customers in Brazil and have become one of the biggest digital banks in the world. Taking Brazil as an example, only 60% of Brazilian cities have bank branches, so the need for digital banking is pretty clear. Let's go one by one on this chart with some of the most relevant e-wallets. PIM and Ualá, both Argentinian neobanks. PicPay and PagBank are Brazilian neobanks. They only cover one single country, so once again, you can see how fragmented the LatAm region is. Nubank is very strong in Brazil and now trying to conquer Mexico as well. Mercado Pago was born initially as part of Mercado Libre, which is LatAm's biggest marketplace. And even though they operate in multiple countries across the continent, users can only hold balances in one single currency. I remember that each country in LatAm has their own currency. Uber and Rappi, as mentioned before, acquired users through other services and eventually pivoted to financial services. And last but not least, Google Pay starting to become more relevant in Brazil, considering the high penetration of Android phones, and probably other countries will follow. Let's look at some numbers now. Around 50 to 60% of LatAm's population is still unbanked. People need an alternative way to pay online. As discussed, for millions of people, it's nearly impossible to get to a bank branch. And along with that, mobile penetration keeps growing and mobile commerce is rocketing. Around 300 million people access internet in LatAm using their smartphones. That's almost the entire population of the US that is sitting in LatAm with their phones, eager to spend money online. Again, what's the impact of e-wallet adoption for consumers? First off, they can get into the mainstream. They can get a banking experience. They can have a card. They can pay online. They can use QR codes and more. And for merchants, once again, they can untap huge market and start accepting payments from millions of new customers that they couldn't reach before. So that's e-wallets in LatAm. And let's move on to our last topic for today, which is how the new fintech law is disrupting the Mexican market. Among other rules, this fintech law creates a sandbox regime for fintech startups of up to 2 years that allows them to operate under a sort of a temporary license without having to comply with all the regulatory requirements at once. So it basically creates room for opportunities for innovation in a very controlled and regulated way. So what is this Mexican fintech law about? First off, it creates balance, regulatory balance between fintech startups and traditional requirements that banks or other big financial institutions are subject to. For whom? For financial companies providing credit or loans, investment opportunities, or even crypto products. And it's a great framework to define the right terminology, the right regulation around data, around privacy, around crypto, open APIs, among other features and topics. What are some of the goals behind this regulation? First off, they intend to give legal certainty to industry participants, expand the financial market, meaning covering segments that are not covered by traditional banking institutions today due to limitations in their infrastructure, for example, cost of services and operational structures. Also, encourage innovation, new products and services that are practical and easy for consumers. Also, provide financial stability, by providing prudential rules in financial risk, as well as establishing some limitations and, for example, maximum amounts for transactions. Also, encouraging healthy competition in order to have greater diversity and reduce costs. And last, preventing the use of fintech activities for purposes of money laundering, for example, as well as protecting the users of financial services. So these are the main goals. And this new law also creates a sandbox regime, as we said, for fintech startups up to 2 years that allows them to operate under this temporary license. And within this 2-year period, they don't have to comply with all the regulatory requirements at once. In other words, they have time to experiment. And as a result, new entities that serve a small number of customers can also test their innovative solutions, their products. This was modeled after the regulatory sandbox in the UK. And again, it enables innovative companies to, well, innovate. And they can do so as long as they get a temporary authorization for a maximum period of 2 years, during which time they can provide their services to a reduced number of clients. So you can see this as a controlled beta testing for new products, essentially. Think of this as a trial period. During this period, they must work to obtain the permanent authorization or registration to continue operating, but they can experiment, test out their products and their services. What's the expected outcome of this new framework in Mexico? For consumers, getting access to more financial products, more and more creative solutions are popping up in Mexico these days. For merchants, it means more opportunities for the long tail, better and faster credit options, and as a result, increasing sales. And it's key to follow closely the market as new companies and services will emerge, definitely. For the market itself, it means more neobanks, more payment companies, more credit and lending companies, more e-commerce solutions, among others. Cool. So the finish line is just ahead of us. Let's quickly go over the poll results, Laura.
Perfect. There you go. The bulk of the people on the call do currently operate in LatAm.
Awesome. So 80% are currently operating in LatAm. Cool. 16% no and 5% not sure. Okay.
Sorry
and the next one.
A little more mixed.
Okay. So we could say around half and half. Okay, cool. So the conclusion here is that there's a huge opportunity to penetrate the LatAm region. And now, before we wrap up, let's look at some of the opportunities to do it. First, the LatAm market is booming, and it's expected to become a $94 billion market in 2 years from now. And you have to be truly local, no matter if you go directly to each of the LatAm markets or leverage a local partner. But there's no way a company can succeed in LatAm if they don't understand PIX, for example, or CVU, or the latest developments around the fintech law in Mexico, or new regulation and taxes that are constantly changing, literally constantly changing. And lastly, offering cards, and especially international cards only, is definitely not enough. Adding cash, debit cards, bank transfers, local and regional e-wallets to the payment mix is key to mastering payments in Latin America. And that's a wrap. Really appreciate everyone for making it this far. And Laura, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Perfect. So if you all, I've seen some questions come in, so if you can send your questions to me, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the ones I do have. Do you expect PIX to change the online payment method share in Brazil?
Yes, quite significantly. Incentives are going to be huge. And with this, it becomes even more relevant to process locally, as the gap basically between the traditional networks, Visa, MasterCard, and the local rails keep expanding. So there's now going to be an alternative to real-time payments in Brazil with PIX without using the traditional rails, without using Visa and MasterCard. So yes, definitely.
So what do you think will happen with Boletto Bancario?
So, okay, for Boletto, I do expect Boletto transactions to decrease, and the same with debit cards. Why waiting for a couple of days to get a confirmation for a payment that was complete already? With PIX, you will be able to get that for free or super cheap and without any extra effort. So I do expect both actually Boletto and debit cards to start decreasing.
So yeah, I would think if I was a merchant, I would definitely be moving towards PIX to get my money faster. Do all banks in Argentina support CVU?
Good question. Nope. The regulation is there. The enforcement is not quite there yet. Many big banks are not fully supporting it yet. As we said before, some are supporting it from their web apps and
oh, that's probably, right. You did mention that, didn't you?
Yeah, probably to say they are compliant, but not from their mobile apps. I guess migrating to such an open protocol and lose control for these big banks is obviously challenging. So it's gonna take some time.
So you also mentioned several e-wallets. So if you're an American company, which ones do you think are key to support? Since I think these are the ones you pointed out, where some were regional, some were very, more far-reaching than others. So which ones do you feel like are key?
Yeah. So I don't see, to be honest, clear winners yet. It's kind of still early to say. For the time being, the ones that we highlighted look like the most promising ones. I think Google Play definitely will keep growing. I expect Apple Pay to, at some point, make an effort to become more relevant as well. They are now starting to operate in Brazil. Rappi, Mercado Pago, and some other local or regional players that we mentioned as well. But it's a very interesting space to keep an eye on and see how it evolves.
Thanks, Michelle. How do you see PIX reducing fraud in Brazil?
That's a very good question. Having this centralized database that we talked about, where all the information from email, CPF, which is the tax ID, phone number, name of the person, the account holder, and having all that information centralized and being able to access it extremely fast, I think it should decrease fraud. Obviously, Brazilians can get creative on ways on how to trick the system. But I see this also from the fraud perspective to be a very positive move for the market.
Thanks. Question, does PIX support recurring billing?
So there are no details yet on this. My guess is that if you were to use the same either virtual key, so the address key, or the same QR code, if it's static, there shouldn't be any blockers. As long as the client implementing PIX, remember PIX is just the infrastructure, and then there's going to be a financial institution relying on this infrastructure, implementing this infrastructure. So as long as they and the PSPs put all the mechanisms in place to do recurring, I think it's gonna be fine. Now, the only question is about confirmation, because as of now, the information that it's available in the market says that every transaction will need to be confirmed. So it'll be interesting to see how this confirmation can be extended to a recurring model, and not having to each time, similar to a 3DS authentication, not having to each time go and confirm for the transaction.
Great. Let's see here. Are PIX payments to merchants regulated by time, such as a 3-day Boletto or 30-day cards?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Are PIX payments to merchants regulated by time, such as a 3-day Boletto or 30-day cards? And if you need clarification, I can ask the person.
No, yeah, if it refers to settlement times, it will definitely be faster than the traditional 30 days that it's the default for credit cards in Brazil, or the 2-day period for Bolettos. This is expected to be in real time. Obviously, then the participants implementing this may have a delay to settle the funds back to the merchant, but you know, the direct participants, I'm expecting them to do it real time or close to real time. So definitely, yes, there's going to be an improvement there.
Great. Let's see. We do have them coming in. This is a really good topic, obviously. People are very interested. Does PIX support installment? Oh, it might be a similar question. Does PIX support installment or recurring? I think we kind of already answered that one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you have any comments about government stopping the release of WhatsApp payments in Brazil?
That's the million-dollar question. Yeah, so I think it all goes back to the same point we discussed earlier, which is the government here is creating the infrastructure to have more control. Think about this, you know, also from a tax perspective, they will be able to control a bigger share of all the transactions, not only online but also in store, peer-to-peer, everything. So they're kind of formalizing the system way more, and they are also trying to create the system where, again, the gap between the traditional international rails with Visa and MasterCard and the local rails is even wider now. So WhatsApp coming with you know, with a proprietary system, obviously goes against this open protocol of PIX. So that's the big dilemma. It's interesting to see what will happen. I see a potential solution of WhatsApp actually relying on PIX, so being one of the clients implementing PIX to rely on this protocol and still be able to connect through their client, which is extremely powerful in Brazil.
Thanks, Michelle. I have a few questions coming in about fraud and disputes, and so I'm going to just run them all off to you. What exposure will these new payment methods have in fraud for merchants, for example, chargebacks and fraud risks? A second question is, are they thinking about fraud in real-time payments, and is there any way to get a refund if something goes wrong? Next question around, do PIX transactions offer a near real-time refund process from the merchant to the consumer, hopefully resolving dispute-style complaints faster?
Yeah, so what I see is that PIX being a centralized system, there will be way more control on the central bank. And when it comes to refunds and everything, as usual, it will depend on each player, each financial institution or each merchant, and how they want to implement this. Again, remember, this is just the infrastructure, and how you utilize this infrastructure is up to each financial institution, each player, each merchant. I would assume yes, there will be refunds, and obviously yes, they will be in real time, relying on PIX, which is way better than, for example, a cash refund or a credit card refund, which can take a few hours, a few days, a few weeks even to get back to the cardholder's account. So the opportunities are there. Now it's a matter of how every player will implement this protocol.
So speaking of implementing, what are the risks of implementing PIX today? I'm assuming that's coming as a merchant.
Yeah, so there's no availability today to implement PIX. As we said, it's gonna launch only in November, and I don't see any risks, to be honest. I see only upside here. I see all the opportunities to get faster confirmations, faster settlements, real time, less risk. Yeah.
And so then kind of a follow-on question that as we
and it's also relevant to mention that for, again, all the financial institutions with over 500,000 active accounts, it's going to be mandatory. So the adoption should be pretty fast.
Great. I think you may have already answered this, but I just want to throw it out there again because it's come in a couple of times. How seamless is the refund process with PIX?
I see a refund just as a normal transaction. It's money flowing from point A to point B in a normal transaction, and money flowing back from point B to point A in a refund. But it's going to rely on the same infrastructure, and it's going to be also real time.
All right. Is there any agreement or an initiative between LatAm countries to enable instant payments for between LatAm countries? I think that's the question, if I got that right.
That's an interesting question. There are no plans today to have that interoperability or that common protocol across different countries in LatAm. We are actually a few steps behind that. We are in a phase where countries are starting to implement that. Actually, Brazil is one of the first ones to implement this real-time payment system. So we still need to wait probably for each country to implement their own, and maybe hopefully one day we will see something similar to SEPA, for example. But I think we are many years behind that. Regulations are very particular to each country. Remember, LatAm, we typically speak about LatAm as one region, but LatAm is just the addition of multiple countries with very different regulations, very different agendas. So I don't think this is coming anytime soon.
Great, thank you. So if you're a consumer and you're using PIX, how do you initiate a chargeback? Or the equivalent thereof?
Yeah, I don't think being an authenticated transaction, there's gonna be an option for a chargeback, to be honest. There might be room for the customer to complain to their bank or financial institution, but I'm not sure if a normal chargeback. Remember, this is not going through the rails of traditional rails, Visa and MasterCard, so those rules wouldn't apply here. Probably there's gonna be, again, this depends on each financial institution and how they implement it, but I don't see a big risk for that.
Yeah, so somebody's pointing out that real-time payments don't have a refund or a chargeback.
Again, I guess when you as a merchant have a policy to refund your customers, and you can rely on this instant payments infrastructure, you can do so. even if the feature is not native to the system, it's the same use case of moving money from point A to point B.
Thanks, Michelle. For the unbanked or the underbanked, how are they funding the local e-wallets? And also, do these support recurring payments online?
Yeah, in many cases, they fund the wallets using cash. So cash is still there in the chain. It's just that they, for example, go to a cash network. Say in Argentina, they go to a RappiPago or Pago Fácil, and using cash, they can top up their wallets, their virtual accounts, their challenger banks, and then they get access to, as we said, they get access to the mainstream. They get this virtual wallet. They maybe get a card linked to that, but still it's cash. Also in Argentina, with the new standard that we discussed, they can fund a virtual wallet from a traditional bank, and also the other way around. So I guess those two are the most popular ones.
So I think we've already covered the first part of this question, but I just want to make sure that we got that. Is PIX irrevocable like real-time payments in the US? What is transaction limit, or is there one?
Sorry, you cut off for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Is PIX irrevocable like real-time payments in the US? And I think we've said yes. Let me know if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct so far.
Okay, and then the second question is there a proposed transaction limit?
So there's no limit defined by PIX, by the infrastructure. It's gonna be on every player implementing it. Those are gonna be the ones defining limits.
Thank you for that. Do you see with the new Mexican regulation for fintechs how that will impact fraud?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see from the framework itself, they are basically creating a better safety net for consumers, and also smaller players can get access to better technologies and basically operate in a similar way compared to a traditional bank. And also I see a lot of room for companies in the fraud space popping up. So more solutions will be available, and it's gonna be probably good for the entire ecosystem. As we know, both Brazil and Mexico are one of the two markets with highest index of fraud in the region. And both topics we discussed today, PIX in Brazil and the fintech law in Mexico, I think are positive signs basically to keep fighting this problem.
So, Michelle, do you think e-wallets will take over cash payments, or will they continue to coexist?
Definitely, cash is not going to disappear. But as we said, the use case of an unbanked consumer, for example, topping up their digital wallet using cash and relying more on the e-wallet. So cash is still there in the flow. It's just that from a merchant consumer, from a merchant standpoint, for example, they don't see cash anymore, and they can just rely on the wallet. But I think they will continue to coexist for a few years. There's also a privacy issue there, that many customers don't want to use cards or even e-wallets, and they want to keep relying on cash because they want the transaction to be anonymous, for example. So I don't see cash going anywhere anytime soon.
Great. So, Michelle, you seem evangelical about alternative payment methods. Do you have any warnings or important takeaways about potential risks that need to be considered?
One of the main challenges that we see around APMs is the fact that many merchants are used to only seeing synchronous transactions, meaning a card payment where you get an instant confirmation. And with many of the APMs, the alternative payment methods, they need to build more infrastructure to accept asynchronous responses, because they, for example, they issue a Boletto in Brazil, and they need to wait for the consumer to physically go and pay for that Boletto, and then they need to wait again to get the confirmation. So that asynchronous factor is definitely a challenge. And as we discussed, for example, with retailers, they sometimes need to hold stock inventory until they get the payment completed or the confirmation. I guess that's one of the main challenges that I see, and that's one of the problems that PIX will probably try to solve.
Let's see what else I got. And we're running up to the top of the hour. Go ahead.
And also, Laura, it's not that I'm evangelical about it. It's more about the reality. You need to understand that if you want to reach all the consumers in these markets, you need to offer whatever is relevant for them. It's not like you can just say, I'm gonna only accept PayPal, but if PayPal is not relevant in Colombia, for example, nobody's gonna use it, nobody's gonna buy your products or services. So it's more about understanding what's the behavior from your consumers and offering what they're used to, so that the payment methods that you accept, that you offer, are essentially payment methods that they are used to using on a regular basis.
Thanks for the clarification, Michelle. What is the shortest time it will take for a merchant to receive their funds?
I'm not sure if the question refers to PIX, probably.
We'll just go with that.
Yeah, I guess so. It's going to be almost immediate with PIX, as we discussed. Again, there are some factors, because there's PIX with SPI, this instant payment system, and the settlement, the real-time settlement system, and then there's a financial institution connected directly, and then there's maybe another institution connected to this one player indirectly. So there might be a delay, but it should be almost immediate.
Great. What percentage of the e-wallet market are unbanked, do you think?
That's a good question. I don't have the numbers. I'm happy to do some research about it, and maybe the person who asked that can send me a note to michelle@dlocal.com, and we can discuss it offline.
Yep, and I'll forward you the question.
Perfect.
Perfect. How does a merchant access the PIX infrastructure? Will there be like the equivalent of gateways? Is it a direct connect, or do existing access points like Cielo intend to extend the PIX service?
Yeah, most of the merchants, I'd say, will access the same way they access today to acquirers or banks or cash networks, basically through their gateways or PSPs or financial partners. So I don't think that's going to change. I think the same players will add PIX payments to their offering, so merchants probably will not have to do a major effort to accept that, just making sure they are partnering with the players that get access to that.
And in theory, will PIX allow 100% payment acceptance where the customer has funds?
Yes, in theory, yes. Obviously, there could be some edge cases, a communication issue, a timeout, or whatever, but yes, should be, as long as you said, there are funds available, it should be close to 100% acceptance rate.
Great. So we did have a question, and I just want to make sure that person is still here. Would you mind, and as we're coming on the last couple of minutes, would you mind explaining what CVU is again?
Sure. Let me go back to that slide. So here, so on the left hand side of the screen, CVU, that's essentially clave bancaria única, meaning unique bank key, and that's the standard that traditional banks have been using for many years. It's just the standard for bank account number. It's a 22-digit long number that identifies a bank account. Now, the new standard, the CVU, is for fintech services, for non-bank financial institutions. And basically, it has the same format. And what it allows is for this interoperability between the legacy system, the traditional banking system, and the new, basically this new era of fintech services, wallets, digital wallets, challenger banks, neobanks like Voila, Mercado Pago, and the ones we discussed.
I just muted myself and then I realized I was talking. So Michelle, this has been a fabulous presentation. Obviously, there were lots of great questions and I'm getting a lot of great feedback coming in. So I just want to thank you for doing this presentation for us, and then also just to thank dLocal for all the support you give to us here at PaymentsEd.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone in the audience. We'll be in touch.
All right, everybody have a great day. I will hopefully get these out to you before we close of business tomorrow, the recording and the deck.